Hey everybody, last game recap of the year. No Monday Night Football tonight. They jammed everything into Sunday. Let's recap some games. The first one was an absolute blowout. 56-19, the Ravens beat the Dolphins. Tua was 22 of 38, 237 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He also had 2 carries for 14 yards. Tua is going to be a really good fantasy asset. I think he's basically going to stay at the level that he has been this season. There's not a lot of physical traits that allow me to project him to be a whole lot better than he is right now, but he's still a really good quarterback. Going to struggle against some tough matchups, but will absolutely get the job done. My guess is he's going to be a top 10 quarterback going into next season. Where he stacks up with, like the Joe Burrows of the world is going to be really interesting. My guess is probably going to be the mid to end of that top 10 is where he's going to project into. Devon Achane, he had 14 carries for 107 yards. He also had 4 catches for 30 yards and a receiving touchdown. He's going to be a tremendous fantasy asset. I actually think he's going to be a little bit underrated going into next season because Raheem Mostert was so good this year. But Devon Achane, this is his rookie year. Remember, he was a healthy scratch week 1, so I think moving off of his rookie year, they're going to be a lot more comfortable giving him the ball with a ton of volume. So I think Raheem Mostert is going to be pushed aside relatively going into next year. So keep that in mind. If anybody is too high on Raheem Mostert, that's when I would jump on Achane and dealing Mostert for sure. Jeff Wilson, he had 3 carries for 21 yards. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of dynasty value with him. He also had 3 catches for 13 yards. Really only a great asset if something were to happen to Mostert and Achane. But he is a few years younger than Mostert, so there is a possibility that Mostert takes a little bit of a backseat to him because he played so well last year also. But with how good Mostert was this year, I don't know if that's going to be totally likely. Chris Brooks had 4 carries for 12 yards. No receiving work for him. Mike White had a carry, and Tyreek Hill had a carry for 0 yards. He also had 6 catches for 76 yards and 12 targets. This was one of his worst games of the year, and that says a lot about how great he was this season. Obviously, Tyreek Hill is probably going to be, if I had to guess, he would be the number 1 receiver. I don't think people are going to be as high on Justin Jefferson going into next season based off of the injury this year. So Jefferson might be the better value, actually, as Hill gets older. And so much of his game is dependent on speed, but that's like super long-term thinking. I still think Tyreek Hill is going to be a very good player next season. Durham Smythe, he had 3 catches for 54 yards. This offense doesn't really prioritize tight ends very much, so I wouldn't worry about him. Cedric Wilson, he had 2 catches for 27 yards and a receiving touchdown. Braxton Berrios, he had 2 catches for 10. Alec Ingold, the fullback, had a catch for 18. Julian Hill had a catch for 9. Robbie Chosen, River Craycraft, and Chase Claypool did not haul in either of their targets. So I know there's some people holding on Chase Claypool in Dynasty, but I think he is a very safe drop at this point. The next team, the Ravens, Lamar Jackson was outstanding. 18-21, 321 yards passing, 5 passing touchdowns. Also had 6 carries for 35 yards. Lamar is going to be absolutely in the top 5 for quarterbacks next season. He's just a stud, probably the league MVP this year. Tyler Huntley, he had a pass completed for 19 yards and a passing touchdown as well. Also had a carry for -1 yards. Gus Edwards, 16 carries for 68 yards and a rushing touchdown. No receiving work for him. I don't think he's going to be a great value in Dynasty. You got J.K. Dobbins possibly returning. You got Keaton Mitchell coming in. Gus Edwards, his value is going to be at its highest, I think, this offseason. Going into this draft season, I think some people are going to be drafting him still, but in my opinion, that would be a mistake because Dobbins and Keaton Mitchell are better players than him. Justice Hill, he had 3 carries for 48 yards, also had 5 catches for 64 yards and a receiving touchdown. I don't think he's going to have a lot of long-term value, honestly, because of those 2 players I just said, especially Mitchell. He kind of fills that scat back role that Justice Hill has, so I wouldn't be holding on to Justice Hill long-term. Trade him if you can because this was a really good performance. Melvin Gordon, he had 6 carries for 10 yards and a rushing touchdown. No receiving work for him. You can leave him on the wire. Zay Flowers, he is somebody who I'm going to be trading for as much as possible in the offseason. 3 catches, 106 yards, and a receiving touchdown on 3 targets. He is a phenomenal player. Him and Lamar have a great connection personally as well as on the field. So this is going to be a connection that lasts a very long time. I think Zay Flowers is just a phenomenal asset to have in Dynasty right now. Rashad Bateman, I don't think he's as phenomenal. Not nearly. 4 catches, 54 yards, and 6 targets. Kind of think he's a drop, honestly, but with Odell getting a little bit older, maybe Rashad Bateman takes some of his receiving work, but in my opinion, that would be the absolute best case scenario. Odell, he had a catch for 33 yards and a target. He's getting up there in age, so I don't know how much longer he's going to be fantasy relevant, but something to keep an eye on. I just wouldn't draft him going into next season. Isaiah Likely, 2 catches, 42 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns on 3 targets. Mark Andrews is going to be always the thing that limits his value. If he goes to another team, though, I can absolutely see him having being a good draft pick. But that's what it's going to take. As long as Mark Andrews is here, I don't think Isaiah Likely is going to have much standalone value. Charlie Kolar, he had a catch for 19 yards and a receiving touchdown. He's really talented, but he's even more buried behind Isaiah Likely. And Nelson Aguilar had 2 catches for 18. And Patrick Ricard, the fullback, had a receiving touchdown on 4 yards. Next game, the Patriots lost to the Bills 27-21. Bailey Zappi, 16-26, 209 yards, 3 interceptions, no passing touchdowns. He did have 5 carries for 37 yards and a rushing touchdown. I don't think Bailey Zappi is a very good hold. This team cut him at the beginning of this year. That kind of tells you what they think of him. Not a long-term solution at quarterback whatsoever. They're going to find somebody else in the offseason. Ezekiel Elliott, 14 carries, 39 yards, and a rushing touchdown. He also just had the 1 catch for 6 yards. It's going to be interesting to see what team he gets onto next year. I think that's going to be the biggest factor in his having value because he's over the hill. He's not the same player he once was, but he did have some value in New England once Ramondre Stevenson went down. As long as standalone, I don't think he's going to be that guy long-term whatsoever. Think like Leonard Fournette this year, like Melvin Gordon. I think that's kind of the direction he's headed. Kevin Harris, he had 2 carries for 15 yards. He was also the leading receiver with 2 catches and 54 yards. Interesting that he's coming on a little bit. That's a name to keep an eye on if someone were to happen to Ramondre and they don't really do anything else at running back in the offseason. Demario Douglas, he had 3 carries for 12 yards. He also had 3 catches for 31 yards on 5 targets. If I were to stash anybody besides Ramondre on this team, it would absolutely be Demario Douglas. He was really the only bright spot on this team offensively. Ramondre had his moments and Zeke had his moments, but Demario Douglas is pretty consistent when he was out there. So I would hold on to him. Not a ton of upside, but if they get a new quarterback, then for sure his value is going to go way up. Jalen Reagor, he had a catch for 39 yards. He's not a dynasty hold. Mike Gesicki, he had 4 catches for 35 yards on 6 targets. No Hunter Henry in this one, so he got a lot of work there. Tyquan Thornton, he had 3 catches for 24 yards on 3 targets. I don't think he's a dynasty hold. And Pharaoh Brown had a catch for 5 yards. Devontae Parker also had a catch for 15. I don't think he's a dynasty hold either. Josh Allen, 15 of 30 for 169 yards, 0 touchdowns and an interception. He also had 11 carries for 44 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. The rushing really helped him. This is why he's going to be in the conversation for QB1 going into next season. I think he finished as the QB1 overall this year. And it was mainly because of this rushing. He can push in these rushing touchdowns. He takes chances down the field throwing the ball. This is the kind of person that we want quarterbacking our fantasy team long term. James Cook, speaking of long term, 16 carries, 48 yards. He only had the 1 catch for -4. Not his best game, but still someone you want to hang on to in Dynasty. I think he is absolutely going to be the bell cow for the Bills next season unless they have a surprise ad on the way. Ty Johnson, he had 5 carries for 22 yards. No receiving work for him. Stephon Diggs had a carry for 5 yards. He also had 4 catches for 26 yards. Just super disappointing end of the season for Stephon Diggs. He's going to be a little bit underrated, I think, going into drafts next year because of that. Stephon Diggs is still the clear number 1 receiver on this team. Latavius Murray, he had a carry for 0 yards. Also wasn't able to haul in his only target. I think we can leave him on the wire, even though he does Latavius Murray his way to getting way too many carries every single year. Kyle Allen had 2 carries for -2. Dalton Kincaid, this was the big surprise. 4 catches, 87 yards, and 7 targets. He's been really struggling since Dawson Knox came back, but this is absolutely a step in the right direction. It's going to be interesting to see if they keep Knox on the team next year or if they just make a point of prioritizing Kincaid, because they did trade up for him. I still think this is somebody at the end of the day that they want incorporated into their offense heavily. Khalil Shakir, he had 4 catches for 39 yards on 4 targets. He's going to be super up and down, just like Gabe Davis. 2 catches, 21 yards on 3 targets. Gabe Davis has the most upside of those two, but if you're playing either of them, just know that they could get you 0 points during any week. Trent Sherfield didn't haul in any of his 3 targets either. So Kincaid, I think, is a very good dynasty asset to hold on to going into next year. It's going to be interesting to see what the consensus is on redraft with him as well. Next game, the Bears beat the crap out of the Falcons 37-17. Taylor Heineke was 10-29, 163 yards, a touchdown, also had 3 interceptions. He had 4 carries for 46 yards and a rushing touchdown. We're not holding on to Taylor Heineke long term. I think he's going to be a career backup. Speaking of career backup, Desmond Ridder, I think that's where he's headed as well. 3 of 4 for 17 yards, and he threw an interception. Not a good day for him. Bijan Robinson, 15 carries for 75 yards. He also had 3 catches for 11 yards. He's going to be a little underrated, I think, going into next season. His usage should bump up moving off of his rookie year. It seems like Arthur Smith kind of knocks dudes who are rookies their first season, so he should be a little bit more comfortable giving Bijan the ball. Tyler Algier, he had 5 carries for 13 yards. He was also the leading receiver off just 1 catch for 75 yards and a receiving touchdown. Bijan Robinson is the clear most talented back here, and I expect him, like I said, to have more usage next season. Good hold. Going to be interesting to see if he's still a first-rounder consensus-wise going into next season, because he was so disappointing at times this year. Drake London, 4 catches, 56 yards on 10 targets. He's the clear number 1 wide receiver in this offense. Hopefully they get a new quarterback. If they do, he is going to be a very hot name going into drafts. But again, it's going to depend heavily on if they get a quarterback. Van Jefferson, he had 3 catches for 19 yards on 5 targets. Michael Pruitt had a catch for 14. Kyle Pitts, he had a catch for 5 on 5 targets. I still think he's a dynasty hold, but again, like Drake London, he's someone who just needs a new quarterback, possibly a new coach as well. Kadarius Hodge wasn't able to haul in either of his targets, and Johnny Smith, 4 targets, no catches. So I don't really think he's a dynasty hold. In a perfect world, especially if Arthur Smith gets fired, then for sure get rid of Johnny. But in a perfect world, I think Kyle Pitts is going to be the tight end 1 in this offense. For the Bears, Justin Fields, 20 of 32, 268 yards, a touchdown. Also had 11 carries for 45 yards and a rushing touchdown. Really finished the season well. Struggled to begin the year, but really found his footing here late. I think the Bears have some really positive momentum. They locked in the number 1 pick because the Panthers stink. The future is very bright for this team. I think Matt Eberflus is a good coach also. So look out for the Bears long term because they're going to be really good. Justin Fields is super talented. I'd be surprised, very surprised if they drafted a quarterback number 1. Khalil Herbert, 18 carries for 124 yards and a rushing touchdown. He also had 2 catches for 5 yards on 3 targets. He's a good player. It's just with this team, you never know who the top running back is going to be. It's either him, Rashawn Johnson, or Deontay Foreman. It's anyone's best guess who it's going to be that week. Rashawn Johnson, he had 7 carries for 21 yards and a rushing touchdown. Also had 3 catches for 38 yards. All these guys, I think they're holds. Especially if Khalil Herbert and Rashawn Johnson, they kind of get rid of Deontay Foreman is what I expect them to do in the offseason and really just focus on Herbert and Johnson because I think those are their 2 best backs as far as consistency is concerned. Velus Jones, he had a carry for 2 yards. DJ Moore, he was great. 9 catches, 159 yards, a touchdown on 13 targets. The clear number 1 receiver on this team. He's going to be a very high pick in redraft. Robert Tonyan, he had 3 catches for 40 yards on 4 targets. Tyler Scott, the rookie, had 2 catches for 15. Colin Johnson, he had a catch for 11. And Kari Blasingame wasn't able to haul in his only target. So I think, hang on to the running backs. Just don't expect consistency from them. And DJ Moore and Justin Fields are tremendous dynasty holds at this stage. The next game, the Colts beat the Raiders 23-20. Aiden O'Connell, he was 30 of 47, 299 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 2 carries for 3 yards. I fully expect this team to make Aiden O'Connell their backup and find a better quarterback, whether it's through the draft or free agency or a trade, because I don't think Aiden O'Connell is going to be the answer long term. Zamir White, you want to talk about a playoff MVP. 20 carries for 71 yards, 5 catches for 35 yards on 6 targets. That'll absolutely get it done. Really a tremendous replacement for Josh Jacobs during the fantasy playoffs. I think he's a hold, especially with the uncertainty of Josh Jacobs' contract and his relationship with the team. It's possible they just turn this thing over to Zamir White with how well he played at the end of this year, but I wouldn't bank on that just yet. Brandon Bolden, he had 2 carries for 6 yards. I think he's going to be off this team because he has so many New England ties, and Josh McDaniels and their GM, Dave Ziegler, also got fired. So don't bank on Brandon Bolden. Don't bank on Amir Abdullah either because of his age. He had a carry for 4 yards. Also had a catch for 18. Devontae Adams was awesome. 13 catches, 126 yards, 2 touchdowns, 21 targets. This is the Devontae Adams of old. It's going to be fascinating. If he gets traded to the Jets with Garrett Wilson, that team is going to be lethal if Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy. But if this team gets another quarterback, Devontae Adams could be, possibly a first-round pick going into next season. Jacoby Myers really was surprisingly good this year. 6 catches, 56 yards on 10 targets. I think he's a hold also with how improved he was. Trey Tucker's an interesting hold because I think he has a speed element to this offense that none of these receivers really bring. 2 catches, 36 yards on 5 targets, more of like a taxi squad guy in a deep dynasty league. Austin Hooper, he had 3 catches for 28 yards on 3 targets. This is going to be the Michael Mayer show. He was just out in this game. So I wouldn't bank on Austin Hooper having very much long-term value, but definitely look out for Michael Mayer next season. Gardner Minshew, 15 to 23, 224 yards, a touchdown, no interceptions. He also had 2 carries for 3 yards. He's, I think, a career backup, but a high-end career backup, absolutely. So not necessarily a priority to hold in Dynasty. Jonathan Taylor, absolutely a priority to hold in Dynasty. 21 carries, 96 yards, and a rushing touchdown. Also had a catch for 8 yards. His future continues to be bright. Probably going to be a first-round pick next year. Trey Sermon, 5 carries for 32 yards. He also had 2 catches for 9 yards. Tyler Goodson, he had a carry for 3, and no receiving work for him. Alec Pierce was the leading receiver off 1 catch. 1 catch, 58 yards, and a receiving touchdown. I don't really think he's a hold because I think Josh Downs is going to be a bigger priority. 2 catches, 53 yards on 2 targets. Michael Pittman, he had 5 catches for 46 on 7 targets. He's going to be a really good dynasty add, especially if they don't add any other receivers. Then for sure he's going to be the guy because they just at times this year gave him so much volume that that's volume that most receivers just don't get. So you got to hang on to him. Will Mallory, he had a catch for 19 yards. Mo Alley Cox had 2 for 18. Colin Granson had 1 for 13. So I wouldn't really hold any of these Colts tight ends either. I think the guys you want to look at are Downs, Pittman, Taylor, and of course Anthony Richardson. He should be really good next year. That's another guy. It's going to be fascinating to see what the consensus is on him. Bryce Young, 19 to 32, 112 yards, no touchdowns and an interception. He also had a carry for 2 yards. This is terrible. His whole year has been terrible. I still think he's a dynasty hold. I'm not ready to give up on Bryce Young yet. This was a rough rookie year, but he's extremely talented. One of the best players in college football when he was at Alabama. And it wasn't just because of his supporting cast either. He does some really special things instinctually. Just some patience with Bryce Young. He had no supporting cast whatsoever this season. Chuba Hubbard, he had 11 carries for 45 yards, also 4 catches for 26 yards. I really think he's just a hold if they don't add any other running backs this offseason. Miles Sanders is a drop, though. 2 carries for 10 yards. Also had 2 catches for 12 yards. Amir Smith-Marset, he had 1 carry for 0 yards, also had 3 catches for 12. Adam Thielen, 6 catches for 38 yards on 6 targets. I think he's going to be overrated in redraft next year, but a dynasty hold nonetheless. DJ Chark, he had a catch for 18 on 6 targets. I think he's a drop. Tommy Tremble, he had a catch for 6 on 3 targets. I'm not so sure he's going to be the tight end of the future there. Steven Sullivan had 2 targets. Ian Thomas wasn't able to haul in his only target. And Jonathan Mingo, 2 catches, 0 yards, 3 targets. He's going to be a deep sleeper, I think, in redraft next year, especially if this receiving group doesn't make any changes. No Trevor Lawrence in this one, so we got all the CJ Beathard we could handle. 17 to 24, 178 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. He also had 3 carries for 24 yards. Another guy, career backup, don't worry about him. Travis Etienne, a tremendous asset in Dynasty. 16 carries, 102 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Also had 2 catches for 16 yards. Just phenomenal stuff. I know Tank Bigsby is going to be a year older next year, but it's still going to be the Travis Etienne show. He's way more talented, in my opinion. Bigsby had 10 carries, but only 32 yards. No receiving work for him. Dearness Johnson had 3 carries for 0 yards. And Matt Barkley getting involved. 3 carries and -3 yards. Evan Ingram. No Christian Kirk, no Zay Jones in this one. It was all Evan Ingram, 6 catches for 60 yards on 6 targets. Great stuff from him. Really surprised. He caught 100 balls this year as a tight end, so he's going to be a popular name in redraft next year. Jamal Agnew, he had 2 catches for 53 yards. He's just a gadget player. Calvin Ridley, he's a dynasty hold for sure, but it was a rough season this year. 4 catches, 39 yards on 8 targets. Just a little bit of patience with Calvin Ridley. I think once he settles into this offense a little more, he's going to be better next year. Luke Farrell, he had a catch for 7 yards. Parker Washington had a catch for 2. Brenton Strange had a catch for 1. And Tim Jones wasn't able to haul in his only target. Next game, the Texans defeated the Titans 26-3. Ryan Tannehill was 16-20, my fault. 168 yards. I can't read today. No touchdowns, no interceptions. Didn't have any rushing work. Came in after Will Levis went down, 2 of 6 for 16 yards. I wouldn't really like Will Levis. I would guess they're going to roll with him next year, but with how high they're drafting, I wouldn't rule out them drafting a quarterback either. So that's definitely something to watch for. I would hang on to Levis just in case they roll with him again next season. Derrick Henry, he had 12 carries for 42 yards. He was not able to haul in his only target. Pretty on and off season for him this year. My guess is he's going to be dropped a lot lower than he has been going into redraft leagues next year. Jonathan Ward getting 3 carries for 11 yards. Tyjae Spears, 6 carries, 0 yards, but he did have 4 catches for 29 yards and 6 targets. My guess is he's going to be a very popular sleeper pick going into next season. If Derrick Henry's still on this team, it looks like he's not going to be, but if he is, then that's going to bring down Tyjae's value a ton. But if Derrick Henry's gone, they don't make any changes, and Tyjae's the lead guy. Tyjae Spears, he absolutely should be drafted in redraft leagues 100%. So a phenomenal dynasty asset to have is Tyjae Spears. I would recommend trading for him, actually. DeAndre Hopkins, 7 catches, 72 yards, and 7 targets. I wonder if he's going to be back next season. But he showed that he still has some left in the tank. Chico Conco, he had 3 catches for 34 yards and 4 targets. Really only one game, it was 1 or 2 games over 10 fantasy points this year, and he didn't miss. So not a great year for Chig, especially with not a whole lot of competition as far as targets are concerned. Expecting a little bit more from Chig this year. Chris Moore, he had a catch for 32 yards. Traylon Burks, interesting dynasty hold, but I wouldn't necessarily make it a priority. 2 catches for 11 yards and 3 targets. It seems like people like him more than his actual production is. People value him higher than his production. So I would recommend trading Traylon Burks this offseason. Kevin Rader had a catch for 6 yards as well. So there is the Tennessee Titans. For the Texans, CJ Stroud, phenomenal year. Obviously, we're holding him. 24-32, 213 yards and a touchdown. No interceptions. He also had a carry for 4 yards. This isn't great, but, I mean, he's right. Like, it's going to be either him or Puka for Rookie of the Year this year. It's just been a phenomenal season for him. Awesome dynasty hold. Devin Singletary, 16 carries for 80 yards. Also had 3 catches for 6 yards. If they don't make any other changes at running back, this is obviously his backfield, but look for them to make some changes this year because Dameon Pierce was supposed to be the guy, and he just was not. 8 carries. 16 yards. Also had a catch for 5. Super disappointing year for Dameon Pierce this year. If you have to drop him in Dynasty, I don't think that's a horrible idea. Nico Collins, he had a carry for 7. Also had 7 catches for 80 yards on 8 targets. He's a decent enough player. It's going to be interesting to see if Tank Dell gets an even bigger role going into next season. But still, Nico and Tank Dell, those seem to be the 2 guys that you have to roster from this passing attack. Even Dalton Schultz to a lesser degree. 2 catches for 19 yards for him. He was decent enough, but he did have some really great spots this season. Robert Woods, he had 4 catches for 58 yards on 4 targets. I don't think he's a priority to hold. Brevin Jordan, he's really going to have, if Dalton Schultz doesn't re-sign, Brevin Jordan's going to have some value. 2 catches for 19 yards and a receiving touchdown for him. Noah Brown, a super up and down year, just 1 catch for 8 yards on 2 targets for him. Not necessarily a priority to hold. John Mechie, he had a catch for 8. Interesting dynasty stash, but more of a taxi squad guy. Xavier Hutchinson, he had 2 catches for 8 yards on 3 targets. And Eric Saubert had just the 1 catch for 2 yards. Next game, the Rams pulled this one out against the Giants, 26-25. Matthew Stafford was 24-34, 317 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions. Also had a carry for -1 yards. Great year for Matthew Stafford. Hang on to him. He should be the starter again next season with how well they played. Looks like they're headed to the playoffs. I'm pretty sure they clinched. Kyron Williams, phenomenal. 20 carries, 87 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. Also had 2 catches for 14 yards. He was unbelievable this year. He's going to be a first-round pick going into drafts next year for sure. Puka Nacua is going to be pushing first-round value as well. 2 carries, 19 yards. Also had 5 catches for 118 yards on 8 targets. Just ridiculous stuff from him. Like 5th-round rookie, pushing someone who looked like the best receiver in the entire league 2 seasons ago. Just a ridiculous year for Puka Nacua. A phenomenal fantasy asset right now. Demarcus Robinson, 6 catches for 92 yards and 10 targets. He really got hot at the end of this year. Hang on to him, see what happens. I just wouldn't be expecting the moon from him. Tyler Higbee, he had 6 catches for 62 yards and 7 targets. It's going to be interesting to see if they use Davis Allen next year a little bit more with Tyler Higbee getting older, but Higbee's a nice high floor tight end. Cooper Kupp, 4 catches, 27 yards, a receiving touchdown saved his day here. He's clearly taking a backseat relatively to what his role was before. Puka is emerging. It's going to be interesting to see where Cooper Kupp finishes next year because my guess is Puka's going to come on even more, it being his second season. But you can never count out Matthew Stafford to Cooper Kupp. So it's just he's in a really weird place. Clearly, we're holding him, but it's just a weird spot he's in right now. And Ronnie Rivers also had a carry for 4 yards. Tyrod Taylor, 27-41, 319 yards, a touchdown and an interception. He was also the leading rusher, 6 carries for 40 yards. Career backup, but he's going to have a very high floor whenever he does get in the game. I'm just not so sure it's going to be for New York next year. Saquon Barkley, he had 12 carries for 39 yards. Also had 3 catches for 19. This was disappointing. He was super hot and cold this year, but I still expect him to push first-round value, probably more of a second-round pick going into next year. Wan'Dale Robinson, he had 1 carry for 24 yards and a rushing touchdown. Also had 6 catches for 55 yards on 9 targets. He's probably going to be if I had to guess, he's going to be the number 1 receiver for this team. But, it looks like they're going to bring Daniel Jones back. So who knows if this passing attack is going to be worth anything again next year. The Giants, very weird spot right now as far as their passing attack. Everyone, I think, is going to be hesitant to, and rightfully so, to draft Giants pass catchers next year. Darren Waller, 5 catches, 51 yards on 6 targets. Disappointing year for him as well, but might be somewhat of a value going into next year. But his age, he's getting up there in age. I'm not so sure about that. Daniel Bellinger, 4 catches, 39 yards on 4 targets. Jalen Hyatt, I think he's if he became the number 1 receiver in this offense next year, it wouldn't surprise me. 3 catches for 25 yards on 4 targets. Isaiah Hodgins had a catch for 18. I think we can drop him. Eric Gray from OU, he had a catch for 6. And Sterling Shepard, also from OU, was not able to haul in his only target. Next game, a shocker. The Cardinals defeated the Eagles 35-31. Kyler Murray, 25-31, 232 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. He also had 5 carries for 24 yards. Really good stuff from Kyler. The Eagles' defense has been struggling against passers all year, so great stuff from Kyler Murray. Great fantasy asset to hang on to. Just a really good fantasy quarterback. James Conner, 26 carries, 128 yards, and a rushing touchdown. Also had a catch for 5 yards and a receiving touchdown. He was red hot to end the year. It's going to be interesting to see if they make any other moves at running back, but as it stands now, James Conner is going to be a great hold. Michael Carter, 7 carries, 61 yards. He also had a catch for 6 and a receiving touchdown. It's going to be interesting to see if he gets a bigger role next year. Interesting dynasty hold. I wouldn't necessarily call it a priority, though. Rondale Moore, he had 2 carries for 8 yards. Also had 3 catches for 26 yards. Interesting dynasty hold, but with Greg Dortch playing the way he did, I'm not so sure we want to do that. Greg Dortch, 7 catches, 82 yards, and 7 targets, the leading receiver for this team. He's really coming on here. He's going to be someone who's going to be picked at the end of drafts and might have some value going into next season. Really interesting hold, I think. Trey McBride, he's going to be a great dynasty asset. 6 catches, 48 yards, 7 targets. He's going to be battling for tight end 1 as far as dynasty going into this year. Michael Wilson, 4 catches, 35 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Good stuff from him. I'm not so sure how big of a role he's going to have in this offense, especially with Hollywood Brown coming back. And with how high they're drafting, it wouldn't shock me to see them draft Marvin Harrison Jr. either. So I think this receiving group is going to be in flux this offseason. Elijah Higgins, he had 2 catches for 21 yards. Amari DiMercado, he had a catch for 9. I don't think he's a dynasty hold. We can move off of Amari DiMercado. It looks like Michael Carter and James Conner are clearly ahead of him in their depth chart. For the Eagles, Jalen Hurts, 18 to 23, 167 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and an interception. He also had 8 carries for 25 yards. Another guy, he's going to be in the conversation for QB1. He just finds ways to get touchdowns. No rushing touchdowns is a shocker, but he was able to get 3 through the air. So awesome stuff for Jalen Hurts individually. DeAndre Swift was the leading rusher, though. 13 carries for 61 yards. He also had a catch for 5. Definitely hang on to him in Dynasty. Kenneth Gainwell, he had 2 carries for 5 yards. Also completed a pass for 17 yards. And 4 catches for 15 yards. Another guy, I think is an interesting hold in Dynasty, actually. DeAndre Swift has had some injury issues in the past. And some issues with the inconsistency. A.J. Brown, disappointing day here, but obviously we're holding him in Dynasty. 4 catches, 53 yards, and 5 targets. Just a great season from him overall. Dallas Goedert, he had 5 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown. Another guy, high floor, tight end. He'll get the job done for you. Julio Jones, 2 catches, 34 yards, 2 touchdowns for Julio. How about that? But we're not holding him. He's long over the hill. Devontae Smith, he had 3 catches for 30 yards on 5 targets. Clearly, we're holding him in Dynasty. He's still a very good receiver. This is a great team. Their defense was just super hot and cold this year. It's going to be interesting to see how they do in the playoffs. Next game, the Saints defeated the Buccaneers 23-13. Derek Carr was good, 24-32, 197 yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Also had 3 carries for -3 yards. That'll get it done. This is an okay year for Derek Carr. Wonder if they'll bring him back next year. Taysom Hill completed 1 pass out of 2 attempts for 11 yards. Also had 2 carries for 1 yard, 2 catches for 30 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Taysom Hill continues to have one of the highest ceilings as far as tight ends. So even though he's getting up there in age, if y'all drafted him at the end of next year, that would make some sense to me. Jamal Williams, how about this? 19 carries, 58 yards. Also had 4 catches for 13 yards. Alvin Kamara, a little bit hurt in this one, so just the 10 carries for 45 yards. 2 catches for 4 yards on 2 targets. I would still hold Kamara. Not so sure about Jamal Williams, though. Adam Prentice, the fullback, had a carry for 7. And, that'll do it for all the rushers there for the Saints. Jawan Johnson really turned it on at the end of this year. 8 catches, 90 yards, and a receiving touchdown on 12 targets. My guess is he's going to be a very popular name in drafts next year. But the beginning of this year absolutely scares me. Chris Olave, he had 3 catches for 26 yards on 6 targets. Horrible day here, but he's still a great dynasty asset. Rashid Shaheed, 2 catches for 14 yards on 3 targets. I think he's going to get overrated in redraft this year. Foster Moreau, he had a catch for 13 yards. Lynn Bowden had a catch for 6. A.T. Perry, he's an interesting dynasty hold, but just a taxi squad guy, had a catch for 5. It wouldn't surprise me if A.T. Perry had a bigger role going into next year. For the Bucks, Baker Mayfield, he was 22 with 33, 309 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Also had a carry for -1 yards. He's the quarterback of the future for the Bucks. He was great this season. Wasn't so sure going into the year, but he was phenomenal. So Baker, definitely hang on to him. Rashad White, we're hanging on to him too. 11 carries, 42 yards. Little disappointing the receiving work in this one, just 4 catches for 24, but he was phenomenal to end the year. Great dynasty hold. If you're worried about the efficiency, though, he might be getting slightly overrated, so keep that in mind. Maybe he's a trade piece. Chase Edmonds, he's only really going to have value if Rachaad White goes out, if nothing changes on this team. 3 carries for 16 yards. He also had 5 catches for 40 yards on 6 targets. Trey Palmer was the leading receiver. 4 catches, 84 yards, and a receiving touchdown on 5 targets. He's really, I think he's a good dynasty hold because Godwin and Evans have had injury issues in the past. Godwin had 3 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown on 5 targets. Mike Evans, 3 catches for 70 yards on 4 targets. Clearly, we're holding both of those guys. Huge surprises with how well Baker played this year. Cade Otton, he had 2 catches for 10 yards and 6 targets. It wouldn't surprise me if they replaced him next season with a different tight end. He should be like a backup blocking tight end, in my opinion, with some receiving capabilities. David Moore wasn't able to haul in his only target, and Devin Tompkins, just 1 catch, 0 yards, and 2 targets. Next game, the 49ers took on the Washington Commanders. Brock Purdy was 22-28, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also had a carry for 4 yards. Clearly, he's the quarterback of the future for this team. He's been phenomenal. What a value he was in drafts this year. Pushing top 10, he's probably going to be a top 10 quarterback going into next year in redraft leagues. Sam Darnold, he wasn't able to complete his pass, just a sack for 6 yards. Elijah Mitchell got a lot of carries in this one with Christian McCaffrey getting hurt. 17 carries for 80 yards and a rushing touchdown for him. No receiving work, though. Christian McCaffrey, before he went down, 14 carries for 64 yards. Also had 4 catches for 27 yards on 5 targets. He is the fantasy football MVP. He had more than 100 PPR fantasy points than any other running back this year. Just insane stuff. So continue to hold on to him. One of the best values in Dynasty right now. Deebo Samuel, he had 3 carries for 35 yards. Also had 5 catches for 37 yards and a receiving touchdown. Another guy, one of the best values in Dynasty. Jordan Mason, he had 2 carries for 3 yards. He seems to be firmly behind Elijah Mitchell and Christian McCaffrey on this depth chart, though. Brandon Ayuk, he's another really good fantasy asset. 7 catches, 114 yards, and a receiving touchdown on 8 targets. This team is going to be Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, until one of those guys retires, gets too old, is hurt for whatever reason. Those are going to be those guys. It's going to be those 4 guys and Brock Purdy for, if they had it their way, it'd be the rest of the time, but it's going to be multiple years of that for sure. Kyle Juszczyk, the fullback, he had 3 catches for 23 yards on 3 targets, and Ronnie Bell wasn't able to haul in his only target. For the Commanders, Sam Howell, 17-28, 169 yards, passing touchdown, 2 interceptions. He also had a carry for -1 yards. He was great the beginning of this year, the middle of this year, but at the end, he sputtered out hard. So do not hold Sam Howell. If there's anybody who wants to give you value for him because of how good he was at the middle of this year, please trade him because this is not the same quarterback. I think he's going to be a career backup, honestly. And it would shock me if he was the Commanders quarterback next season. Brian Robinson, I think he's a hold, though. 9 carries, 44 yards. Also had 4 catches for 32 yards. Really good running back. I'm not so sure he's going to be the workhorse again next year, but he's still a solid running back. Should get plenty of touches still. Good dynasty hold. I think Antonio Gibson's a decent hold, too. Just not the greatest of holds. 4 carries, 19 yards. He also had 2 catches for 17. No Chris Rodriguez in this one, so that's another guy who's going to be eating into Antonio Gibson's and maybe Brian Robinson's role next year as well. Terry McLaurin, 4 catches, 61 yards, and a receiving touchdown on 6 targets. He's going to be underrated going into redraft leagues next year. Going to be really interesting to see who their starting quarterback is next year because that's going to tell a lot about what Terry McLaurin's fantasy value will be. But off ability alone, he is one of the best receivers in the NFL. Curtis Samuel, he had 3 catches for 33 yards on 4 targets. Not necessarily a priority to hold in Dynasty. He's going to be super up and down his whole career, I think. Logan Thomas, he had 3 catches for 20 yards on 4 targets. It wouldn't surprise me if Cole Turner came on a little bit more for this team next season, with Logan Thomas getting up there in age. John Bates, he had a catch for 6 yards and 2 targets. He might take a little bit off of Logan Thomas's plate as well. Byron Pringle wasn't able to haul in his only target, and Jahan Dotson. You want to talk about a disappointing fantasy season. Wasn't able to haul in his only target. Crazy up and down all year. If you can get rid of him for anything, I would recommend doing that, but he's absolutely not a priority to hold in Dynasty long term. Next game, the Steelers beating the Seahawks 30-23. Mason Rudolph is 18-24, 274 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. He also had 6 carries for 5 yards. He was really good to end this year. The last 2 games have been awesome. Going to be interesting to see if they roll with him next year. My guess is he's going to be their primary backup, but definitely look out for that. Interesting hold in Dynasty. I just wouldn't make it a priority because of he's had years of being a backup there, and he hasn't emerged yet. Najee Harris, 27 carries, 122 yards on 2 touchdowns. No receiving work in this one. He's a decent hold, but I think Jalen Warren is a better back. 13 carries, 75 yards, and a rushing touchdown. Also had 4 catches for 23 yards. Next season, it should be a little bit more Jalen Warren than Najee Harris, but it wouldn't surprise me if they kept giving Najee some volume because he wasn't atrocious this year. There was definitely worse players than him. George Pickens, 7 catches, 131 yards on 9 targets. Where he gets ranked next year is going to be an absolute mess. People are going to have him all over the place. Some people are going to think he is the second coming. Other people are going to think he is completely useless. Again, it's going to depend heavily on who the quarterback is. He has all the talent in the world. It's just, for whatever reason, he's just super inconsistent. So keep that in mind with George Pickens. The true answer is probably going to be somewhere in the middle with how polarizing he's going to be in redraft next year. Deontay Johnson, 4 catches, 76 yards on 4 targets. He's an interesting dynasty hold. Just don't expect a whole lot from him. More of a high floor play. Pat Freiermuth, 3 catches, 44 yards on 4 targets. I think he's overrated in dynasty, honestly. I would trade him. Personally, I think Darnell Washington is a better player than he is. But Darnell didn't really play all that much this year as far as receiving the ball is concerned. For the Seahawks, Geno Smith was 23-33, 290 yards, a passing touchdown, no interceptions. He also had 3 carries for 33 yards. I don't think he's that great of a quarterback. He's okay, but I don't think he's a Super Bowl winner whatsoever. It wouldn't shock me if they got a new quarterback this season, but with how it seems that the coaching staff loves him, the locker room loves him, so maybe they stick with him another year, but I just don't think he's going to be the guy that can get them a Super Bowl at the end of the day. Ken Walker, he had 10 carries for 53 yards and a rushing touchdown. He also had 3 catches for 22 yards. Interesting dynasty play. Again, it's going to be interesting to see if Zach Charbonnet, coming off of his rookie year, is going to have more of a role. Only 2 carries for 2 yards, but he did have 5 catches for 39 yards on 5 targets. Wouldn't shock me if Charbonnet has more of a receiving role like this going into next season. Ken Walker is probably going to be a little bit overrated, I would guess. DK Metcalf, 5 catches, 160 yards on 8 targets. Clearly the number 1 receiver on this team, and he's going to be for the foreseeable future. Noah Fant, if I had to take a tight end here, it would be him, but I just wouldn't prioritize Noah Fant. 5 catches, 59 yards, and 6 targets. Colby Parkinson, he had 2 catches for 38 yards. Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think he's an awesome dynasty asset, but as long as Geno Smith's the quarterback, I'm not sure if he can support Lockett, Smith-Njigba, and DK Metcalf, even though they're all 3 really good receivers. Smith-Njigba, just the 1 catch for 12 yards and a receiving touchdown on 2 targets. Tyler Lockett, he had 5 targets, but only 1 catch for 10 yards. Super disappointing stuff there. I would be fading Tyler Lockett next year if I were you guys. Jake Bobo, he had a catch for 4 yards on 1 target. I don't think he is a long-term dynasty hold with how talented the receivers are ahead of him. Next game, the Chiefs lost to the Bengals 25-17. Jake Browning, 19-33, 197 yards and a passing touchdown. He also had 7 carries for 32 yards and a rushing touchdown. He's going to be a career backup, but he was really good without Joe Burrow. Really solid fantasy-wise. Just something to keep in mind, but I'm not so sure he is a long-term starter in the NFL. Joe Mixon, he had 21 carries on 65 yards, also had 4 catches for 22 yards and a receiving touchdown. This situation really reminds me of the Steelers because I think they're going to continue to give Joe Mixon volume, but Chase Brown, like Jalen Warren, is going to be a thing. Only 3 carries for 5 yards here, but 2 catches, 23 yards on 2 targets. He's going to have a role. He's a talented enough player to make that happen. Travion Williams, I think he's a drop, though. 1 carry for 2 yards for him. Jamar Chase, just 3 catches for 41 yards and 7 targets. Disappointing year this year, but as long as Joe Burrow's out there, he's going to be way better than this. So probably going to be a little underrated going into drafts next year. Tanner Hudson, 3 catches for 38 yards and 7 targets. He really asserted himself as the number 1 tight end in this offense towards the end of the year. Tyler Boyd, 2 catches for 29 yards on 2 targets. We kind of already know what he is. Not a great hold, but probably someone you should hold in deep dynasty leagues. Drew Sample, he had 3 catches for 21 yards. T. Higgins, just the 1 catch for 19 yards and 2 targets. Super disappointing year, but if Joe Burrow's back, and if T. Higgins is back, it's not a guarantee that T. Higgins is back either. But if everything stays the same, he's really going to have value if Joe Burrow is back. Trenton Irwin, he had a catch for 4 yards and 2 targets. Look out for him if T. Higgins leaves in free agency. And Mitchell Wilcox wasn't able to haul in his only target. Patrick Mahomes, 21-29, 245 yards, a touchdown, and no interceptions. He also had 4 carries for 2 yards. Disappointing. That's the main theme for Patrick Mahomes' season this year. Hopefully he gets some receivers because I think that was ultimately his downfall this year. But it wasn't an awful year. He was playable, but definitely not QB1 like we thought he would be. Isaiah Pacheco, 18 carries for 130 yards. Also had 7 catches for 35 yards and a receiving touchdown. He's ridiculous. A tremendous asset in Dynasty. It's going to be fascinating to see where he gets picked next year. If I had to guess, he's going to be a little bit underrated because he's just a phenomenal back. The Chiefs really got to find with Isaiah Pacheco. Rashee Rice, 5 catches, 127 yards, and 6 targets. He's a good receiver, but I think if the Chiefs can find, I don't think Rashee Rice is top of the top as far as receiver talents. He's a good receiver. He's going to have a role. But if anybody's valuing him as the number 1 receiver in this offense, especially if they add somebody else, I wouldn't be taking that. If nothing changes, it would shock me, but that's when I would say, okay, Rashee Rice, he's going to be a premium hold. But if they add someone else, don't worry about hanging on to Rashee Rice. I think he's going to be up and down for the rest of his career, honestly. Justin Watson, he had a catch for 41 yards and 3 targets. Clearly, we're not holding him in Dynasty. Same thing with Noah Gray, 3 catches, 17 yards, and 4 targets. Travis Kelce, it was a super disappointing year, but we still got to hold him. 3 catches, 16 yards, and 4 targets. It's going to be interesting to see where people value him going into redrafts next year because he absolutely is going to be challenged for tight end 1 for the first time in a few years. Richie James, he had a catch for 6 yards, and MVS, he's a very safe drop. Yeah, just the 1 catch for 3 yards on 3 targets. Next game, the Broncos defeated the Chargers 16-9. Easton Stick, 24-38, 220 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Also had 5 carries, 31 yards. Going to be a career backup. Don't worry about him. Austin Eckler, 13 carries, 46 yards. Only had the 1 catch for 4 yards. A disappointing year, but he was still somewhat playable, but definitely not the top 5 pick that I think I had him 5th in my top 100 preseason. So it is a disappointing year in that regard, but at least he was playable. I think that's what we can say about Austin Eckler this season. Gerald Everett, he had a carry for 6 yards, also had 4 catches for 31 yards on 9 targets. He's an interesting high floor tight end sort of ad there. Darius Davis, he had a carry for 2 yards. A lot of people getting carries here. Joshua Kelly getting 2 carries for 2. Nick Neiman had a carry for 0 yards, and Isaiah Spiller had a carry for -1. Alex Erickson was the leading receiver with Josh Palmer out, Keenan Allen out. Alex Erickson, 7 catches, 98 yards on 8 targets. Not a dynasty hold. Quentin Johnson, 3 catches, 29 yards, and 6 targets. He was brutal this year. I don't think he's a total lost cause. I would still be holding him in dynasty. But it is not looking good, especially with Mike Williams coming back. Keelan Doss had 5 catches for 25 yards on 8 targets. Stone Smart, he had 2 catches for 23. Isaiah Spiller added 2 catches for 10 as well. I think if we're going to get any back besides Austin Eckler here, it's going to be Isaiah Spiller, but it wouldn't shock me if there were some changes in that Chargers backfield next year. Jarrett Stidham, he's only really a career backup, but this is okay. 20 of 32, 224 yards, a touchdown, and no interceptions. He also had 6 carries for 6 yards. I wonder if Sean Payton will stick with him long term or if they're going to try to find another quarterback in the offseason because it doesn't look like Russ is coming back. Jaleel McLaughlin, he had 8 carries for 44 yards. Also had 3 catches for 18 yards. it was surprising to me that they didn't use him more this year. So I wonder if next season, when he's not a rookie, they'll do that. Javonte Williams, 15 carries, only 41 yards, 3 catches for 17 yards. Coming off that brutal knee injury, it kind of explains some of his struggles this year. It was an okay year, but definitely not great by any means. Lil Jordan Humphrey, he was the leading receiver. 2 catches, 69 yards, and a receiving touchdown on 4 targets. Only really if Sean Payton has a ton of injuries will we be adding Lil Jordan Humphrey. I wonder where Jerry Jeudy's going to go in the offseason. 3 catches, 54 yards, and 6 targets. I think he's a hold, but not necessarily a priority. Brandon Johnson, he had 4 catches for 27 yards. Jaleel McLaughlin had a 3 for 18. Samaje Perine, he had 2 catches for 16 yards. Also had 4 carries for 10 yards. Not someone you want to hold in Dynasty. Lucas Krull had 2 catches for 14. Adam Troutman had a catch for 9. I wouldn't be holding him either. And Philip Dorsett, not able to haul in either of his targets. Last game of the night, the Packers defeated the Vikings 33-10. Jordan Love, 24-33, 256 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Also had 2 carries for 2 yards and a rushing touchdown. He was good this year. I'm not so sure he's a Super Bowl quarterback, but he'll get the job done. So I absolutely expect him to be back next year. He's probably going to be a top 15 quarterback in drafts. Sean Clifford, he had just completed the 1 pass for 37 yards. Aaron Jones, 20 carries, 120 yards. Also had a catch for 10 yards. It's going to be interesting to see where he goes in redraft leagues next year because he was hot and cold very much this season. Patrick Taylor, 8 carries for 30 yards. No receiving work for him. Also wouldn't shock me, back to Aaron Jones, that if he were to make some sort of revival next year, because he was dealing with injuries a lot this year, if he's fully healthy, I think he's clearly a better back than A.J. Dillon. 7 carries for 27 yards for Dillon. No receiving work for him. Not the greatest dynasty hold, in my opinion. Bo Melton was the leading receiver. 6 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown on 9 targets. I don't think he's a dynasty ad. A lot of injuries here. Romeo, I think, should be getting more work than Bo Melton. Just a weird... that's kind of been the story all year for the Packers. A weird distribution of targets all year. Jaden Reed was really good. Great dynasty hold, Jaden Reed. 6 catches, 89 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. He's been phenomenal all season. Keep hanging on to him. The clear number 1 receiver, if there's no... not the clear because Christian Watson's still there, but him and Christian Watson are going to be a really good tandem. Not really good, but passable tandem for Jordan Love. Tucker Kraft, 6 catches, 48 yards, and 6 targets. I think he's going to be a little bit overrated because of the Luke Musgrave injury. Just keep in mind, Luke Musgrave is the tight end of the future for this team, at least the primary receiver. Malik Heath, he had a catch for 13 yards. Romeo Doubs, 3 catches, 28 yards, and 6 targets. I think he's still a dynasty hold, but it just didn't look good, especially with Bo Melton passing him. That's pretty rough. Ben Simmons, he had a catch for 6. Samori Toure, he just had the 1 catch for -6 yards. For the Vikings, it was a mess on offense. Nick Mullins was 13-22, 113 yards, and a touchdown. He came in the second half after Jaron Hall was benched, 5 of 10, 67 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception for Hall. I don't think we really want to hold either of these guys. Nick Mullins would be the guy I prefer out of those two, though. Ty Chandler, he had 10 carries for 40 yards. He also had 3 catches for 24 yards. Wonder what his value is going to be next season, if they keep this running back room the same or if they make some changes. I would think that they make some changes because Alexander Madison was a disappointment. 3 carries for 17 yards. Also had 2 catches for 13. Not the best. I think you hold him because they might still use him next year, but that's a big if. So just watch out for news on him. Justin Jefferson, 5 catches, 59 yards, 10 targets. Really helped him out when Nick Mullins came into the game. Clearly, we're holding Justin Jefferson. He should go back to being the number 1 receiver in fantasy next season. Johnny Munt, he had 4 catches for 39 yards and a receiving touchdown with no TJ Hawkinson. He benefited the most. Josh Oliver just had the 1 catch for 17 yards on 2 targets. Jordan Addison, my guess is that they find a new quarterback besides Kirk Cousins in the offseason, and if he's decent enough, Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, I think they can all have value. Addison was disappointing here, though. Just 3 catches, 28 yards on 5 targets. Yeah, and Brandon Powell not able to haul in either of his targets. So that is going to do it for game recaps in 2023, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in all year. I really appreciate it. Really enjoy doing these. Please like, comment, subscribe. I'll be trying to think of more video ideas to do throughout the year. Tune into @WeAreDrafting on Instagram. We will be doing NFL draft, NBA draft, general NFL and NBA coverage all year. Postseason awards are still going on, so we'll be following those. I will see you over there, and thank you again so much for watching.